Now we're going to begin the new shir.
And now the Rebbe continues. When you take into consideration these three arguments, being a Beinani is a it's a Beinani in the neck. it's an endless war. But you're Mekayim a lav of a leisa sruda which tzaddikim don't have. It's a total misplacement of level, right? To think that you should be a madreges tzaddik. And the nachas ruach that Hashem gets from the Aveda of Beinani is even greater than the nachas ruach of Hashem tzaddik. And therefore, al yipa leivadam alav. A person should not allow his heart to fall on him. He should not allow his heart to be bittered at all. Gamam yikain kol yamav. Even if this is how he's going to live his whole life, in this battle. Because perhaps lekach nivra, this is why he was created. This is what Hashem wants of him. To ben klip all the time. I want to tell you something interesting. There were two Hasidim. One was actually much younger, and the other was much older. Rabbi Hillel Parachet and Rabbi Ezel Hamler. Rabbi Ezel Hamler was the Malten Rebbe's Chassid from what they used to call the Mittel Chassid. Malten Rebbe was a Rebbe for a long time. So we had older Chassidim, middle Chassidim, and younger Chassidim. The oldest Chassidim were, godly people almost. They were almost unbelievable. The youngest in the Alter Rebbe were also the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, but they were people. Rabbi Ezel was in the middle Chassidim with the Alter Rebbe. He was a Goan. He used to make a Siyum on Shas every year. He was a Gavaldik. Friedrich Rebbe calls him Harav, Goan, or Amiti, Isha Ashkeles. Isha Ashkeles means Ish Asher Kol Boy. But the Isaac Hamler was not a tzaddik, he was a Beinani until the day he passed away. He lived a long time. Could be he lived past 90. He passed away in Tafresh Yud Zayin. This is about 9 years before the Tzemach Tzedek, and he was probably 15 years older than the Tzemach Tzedek, maybe more. So he probably lived close to 90, I don't know, but he lived a very long life, Abaisel. And the Alter Rebbe once said to him, come with me to the mikveh and I'll lift you up to Madreges Tzaddik. I'll lift you up. So Rabbi Ezel says, I want to work myself. Later in life, he regretted it. He regretted how come he didn't take on the Alter Rebbe's proposal. And as an old man, he was still a Beinani. So Chassidim did say that when Rabbi Isaac was old, and as the expression is, his body wouldn't listen to his will. Rabbi Isaac was an unbelievable chassid. He once traveled from Hamel to Lubavitch. He was in his 70s. An old man, yeah. And those days traveling was not like today. It wasn't an airplane, it was a wagon. And he slept for weeks on bumpy roads that didn't have shock absorbers. You know what I'm saying? When you went over a bump, you felt it. He arrived in Lubavitch at night, and he went to see the Rebbe, and then he went to his Dira, to his Chsanya. The Tzaddik called in a few younger light. He said, Geit zet was tut dem Zeiten za soldat. Go see what is my grandfather's soldier doing. An old chassid just traveled for weeks in a wagon on these bumpy, rickety roads. They walk into his Achsanya, and he stood a whole night learning Nigla. That's given a Beisel. But when he was too old and his body wouldn't cooperate, so he always verbringt. And effective Zidlin, he used to curse himself. He used to put himself down and call himself all the names that you have in Tanya Perikov Test, with such vitriol, with such anger. It was difficult to listen to. Because my interpretation of the story is, since he had a Yetzer Hara, he had what to break. Rabbi Hillel was much younger than Rabbi Ezel. Rabbi Hillel was born after Rabbi Ezel was already a chassid, you understand? He was a middle Rebbe's chassid, but Rabbi Hillel was a tzaddik. It's a whole different issue. Rabbi Hillel was a rich chassid. Rabbi Ezel was a soldier. He was a giant. He was a general. And B'Sof Yoma, because he was a Beinani, and the body wasn't listening to the mind. Again, this is how I read it. He says, perhaps for this he was created. This is your job. To break which is Pshat in the Gemara, which we had on the first page of Tanya. And then it was repeated again in chapter 13. In Perek Yud Gimel, Hashem creates tzaddikim and reshayim. When it says Hashem created the Reshayim, it doesn't mean taka bad people, God forbid, because they have free will. They are touched, and it reaches them. Things that happen to the Reshayim as well. What is that? In their thought, and in their hira also means thought. Levad alone, bad thoughts pop into their heads. If they would perpetuate those bad thoughts, they'd be a Russia. But they're not Reshayim because they're going to constantly fight to clear their minds from these bad thoughts. To bend the klipa, they'll never be able to conquer and defeat the klipa altogether, which we would call is hapche. This is only done through tzaddikim. You follow? Zog the Alter Rebbe, I want you to know, you should never view a Beinani as an unfinished tzaddik. A tzaddik is a finished tzaddik. Yeah, tzaddik v'rali is a finished tzaddik v'rali. A benini is a finished benini. Because ushnei mini nachas ruach lefanav yisbarach l'mayla. Two distinct types of pleasures exist on high by the Eibishter. Aleph, number one. Breaking klipa altogether. Ve'ishapcha, and transforming from bitterness to sweetness, and mechashecha hate of darkness to light. This is a madrig of tzaddikim, and you're not a tzaddik. Ve'ashenis, and the second type is kadis kafia seterachar. One bends klipa, that it's be'eda, betokfo, ugvorasa, it's still in all of its might and all of its power. Umakbiya atzma kanesha, and it creates this artificial pretense, like I explained to you yesterday, Shir. The klipa is nothing. It's nothing except for a power of suggestion. Klipa comes along and says, look what a taiva I am, what a desire, what a temptation. And you say, wow, unbelievable, how could I not partake? The klipa is not real. The only reality of the klipa is the power of suggestion. If you believe it, you created the reality of the klipa. If you don't believe it, you discover that it's nothing. When a person wins his Yetzer Hara, you're never going to say, wow, I defeated my Yetzer Hara, it was no big deal. When a person loses the Yetzer Hara, I couldn't help myself. But the klipa is only making suggestions. It's making advertisements. It lifts, it soars like an eagle. It says, look how beautiful, look how tempting, look how unbelievably attractive I am. When you believe it, you create the reality of the klipa, like the Rebbe says in Tanya chapter 29. When you don't believe it, you discover that it was nothing all along. That's like Magbiyah. It soars like an eagle, and guess what? You puncture a hole in the parachute, it's nothing. But it seems very powerful. Klipa is a tremendous power of suggestion. You're inclined to think, wow, this is unbelievably difficult for me to overcome. You know, it's like, they said, it's kikaira, it's kahar, it's like a mountain or like a huge beam, rather than being a kissim, a spindle, a toothpick, and a molehill, a little tiny. When you lose to the Yetzer Hara, you think it's a huge deal. You know what Amanda Futafas used to say about a guy who goes to sleep, and a fly is flying around his nose. You've had that experience. Shabbos afternoon, or here it is. For half an hour you lay in bed and the fly drives you absolutely insane. So you forget it, you get up. No one ever says, oh, there was a fly, it didn't let me sleep. It's always, oh, I wasn't interested in sleeping. I'm not tired anyway. Why? A fly. You're going to say a fly got you out of bed. Do me a favor. You understand? Klipa is makbiyah. It creates an artificial sense of largesse, of being gigantic. And Hashem makes the klipa vanish. How? Through the fight of the Beinani. That if and when the Beinani bends himself, by not giving into his bad thoughts, he breaks himself, and the Eibishter breaks the klipa, and he discovers that he was fighting with nothing at all. Says the Rebbe, and this idea that a Beinani is not a half a tzaddik, but the two distinct pleasures that Hashem gets, the pleasure of his hapcha through tzaddikim, and the pleasure of his kafir through Benyanim, is represented by a pasuk and a zayir, I believe. The pasuk says that Yitzchak says to Yaakov Avinu, "Vaseli matabam kasher ahavti." I'm sorry, Yitzchak says to Esav Arasha, go make for me tasty foods, mat'amim. And of course the Gemara says, "V'chima cholish Yitzchak shnei gedoyim." Yitzchak ate 2 goats a day. And the Gemara answers, Rashi brings it in Chumash, that it was Pesach, and Yitzchak wanted to eat the korban Pesach and the korban Chagiga. But the Zayir also asks the question. Yitzchak goes on the Eibishter, and Esav goes on Knesset Yisrael. And Hashem says to Yid, I need 2 types of food. What, I need to have fish and chicken, what? Or whatever it is, chopped liver and chicken. What is the Eibishter's 2 types of food? Lo Sherab in plural, says the Zayir, says the Rebbe based on the Zayir, Shnei Mini Nachas Ruach. Hashem has 2 types of food. Vehi, and this Vuhu, and this is Ma'im Ashchina. It's a statement of Poyachal, the Eibishter, Lebanet, to her sons, Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people as a whole, Kutapishu, but it says in the Zayir. Just like in physical foods, derech mashal by way of example. Yeshni mini madanim. There's 2 types of pleasantries. Echad, the first type of pleasant foods, is mimachal marev, pleasant and sweet foods, naturally tasty foods. There's something tasty and good, right? V'asheni, and the second is midvarim charif, something which is sharp or acidic, bitter, sour. They're not tasty. They are spiced. Umusukanim, and prepared. Hate properly. Till they becomes pleasantries. To cause a person to be settled and to relax. Pleasurable things make a person calm. They settle a person down. Says the Rebbe this. When you take something which is naturally sharp or bitter or sour and prepare it appropriately and make from it a pleasant gericht, a tasty food, it actually has a greater appeal than something which is naturally sweet and tasty. Says the Rebbe, this is about the Eibishter, the same thing. Hashem enjoys the pleasant avodah of tzaddikim and the transformation of the bitterness and the darkness of the Beinani in the Iskafia. Two types of pleasure. And as we learned yesterday's Shir, Hashem actually gets more nachas from the fight of the Beinani than from the victory of the Tzaddik. As the Pasuk says, Kol Paul Hashem. Everything that Hashem did, Lamaneo, ultimately did for himself. V'gam Rasha, and even the creation of a Rasha, is Liyayim Ra. Now Liyayim Ra literally means for the day of evil. But he translates not for the day of evil that Rasha is going to be punished, but Liyayim Ra means to reveal godliness in it all. Pirush. Sheyashav Mirishay, the evil one returns from his evil. V'yasa, and to make Harashalei, his evil, into Yayim V'yer, light and day. Lamaila, Kad, when he repeats the same Zayir again, Iskafi Sitarachara, one Ben Sitarachara Klipa, Vistalak, Yikara the Kuchabrichu, there's an expansion of the glory of a Kuchabrichu, Le'ela on high.